So validates email presence true. Length, let's go with 100 plus add example. So total, we'll just go with maximum 105. Let's see if this works. Okay, it's passing. Great. Okay. Next, we're going to ensure that the email address isn't too short. So let's do that. Actually, I don't think we need this one. We don't need the email validation to be too long or too short, because we're gonna check for a valid email by testing for email formats. So that'll take care of that. Okay, so we want the email address to be unique since we're going to use that for chefs to log in into our system. Chefs meaning users. All right, so let's go ahead and build that. The email address should be unique. Okay, we're going to create, so we have a chef object that we set up with an email address. How we're going to do this is we're going to assign a local variable, assign it to the chef object, duplicate of the chef object that we already have, and then we're going to save the chef object and then check if the in-memory variable that we just created is valid or not. And our expectation is it should be invalid, since after the save there should already be an email address that exists. Okay, so let's try that out. So dupe chef is, now this chef object already exists that we created during the setup. So dupe chef. Now we're going to ensure that email address is not case sensitive. So I'm going to change this to uppercase to ensure that it doesn't check for case sensitivity. Then I'm going to save our chef object, and then that should make our dupe chef object that we just created, that should return invalid. Right now this test is going to fail because we don't have that validation. So let's test and make sure it fails. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and build this to our validation. So validates email presence true. Let's try this. And uniqueness true. That should enforce it as unique. But this will still fail due to the case sensitivity. Okay. Yep, it's still failing because we changed it to uppercase. So now we want to test for uniqueness, but we want to ensure that it doesn't test for case sensitivity. So how do we do that? We do that, there's a simple way in Rails to do that. You just basically say uniqueness case sensitive false. this not only ensures that it doesn't check, the check is not case sensitive, but it also makes sure it checks for uniqueness. Just by having this there, it's ensuring that the email address is unique. Okay, let's see what happens now. Great, it's passing. All right, so let's see what we have on our spec next. So we have unique, email is present, email address must be valid. Okay. So let's do this. Email. So how we're going to do this is we're going to check for some valid addresses, and then we're going to create a test to reject invalid addresses. So let's try that. Let's check for valid addresses first. Email validation should accept valid addresses. And then email validation should reject invalid addresses. Okay, so let's give it a few valid email address formats. So valid, I'm going to create a local variable, valid addresses. Then I'm going to use this method. It's called %w. And then whatever you put within this, it's going to separate out into different elements of an array. So first, let's give it user. And then let's give it our TDD. Okay, so both of these are valid email addresses. Now what this method is going to do is it's going to take this and then turn it into two elements of an array. Okay, and then we can iterate through the array and ensure that all of them show up as valid. All right, so here we're going to use the assert valid instead of assert not, since we're expecting it to pass, since we're expecting these to be valid addresses. All right, let's give it a couple more. Let's give it a base one example. What else? All right. Now let's iterate through each of these elements. And the way you iterate through in Ruby and Rails is .each. It's one of the ways, there are several, but we're going to use .each over here. And this, you can call whatever. We can call it A if we want. We can call it, you know, I'm gonna call it VA for valid addresses. And then we're going to assert each one as valid. So first assign them to this object. So as it iterates through the elements of this array over here, it's going to assign each one to this VA object, right? So each time valid addresses is going to assign to this VA object, and then as it goes through and iterates through each of those objects, it's going to check for, it's going to first assign the email to VA, which is the email, which is each element as it iterates through, and then it's going to assert whether it's valid. And then I'm going to do a custom message here. this .inspect method will basically list out which one it is, and then it will print it it'll store it in this variable, which will be displayed in this string, which is the email address. It'll give the email address should be valid. All right, so that should be the test for valid. Now let's test for invalid. Give it some invalid addresses. We'll use the same method. And give it some invalid email addresses, email address formats. Again, we'll loop through each one. We'll loop through each element in this array. So invalid addresses dot each two. And as we loop through each element, we're going to assign our email to the invalid address, which is each element, like we did above. I'm going to call it IA this time because it's invalid addresses. You can call it anything you like. And this time we're expecting a nil or false result. So I'm going to assert not. Whoops, I think I have an error here. Okay. There you go. Same thing. If it fails at any point, I want to know which one is failing. So I'll read that and then print it to screen, and then should be invalid. Okay. Then I'll close the loop, end. All right, we seem to have a bit of a problem here. Why do we have a problem? Oh, well, this is an error right here. All right. So this test should be failing for these two. We have one failure. Should reject invalid addresses. Okay. Didn't fail this one because we don't have any validation. So yes, it should accept anything. Right? So this is obviously going to pass because all of these are going to be valid. But here we seem to have a bit of a problem. So why is this failing? Why is this test failing? It's because it's expecting a failure here, and it's expecting it to reject the invalid addresses. However, we don't have any validations. So it's accepting all of the addresses, including these ones, and not rejecting them. So all formats are being accepted. So that's why this test is failing. So let's go ahead and add email validations. Email format validations. Okay, so how are we going to validate email format? So email is validated using regex. And if you look up email format validation regex, you'll come up with a lot of results on Google. And some of them are very massive. In fact, the primary one is very big, and it's not necessary. There's a shorter version of it, which we're going to use here. And I will have this in the notes, so you won't have to memorize this. But you can also look this up on Google. So we're going to assign a constant. And the way you tell Rails a variable is basically it's a constant, which means it's not going to change, is by having it all in uppercase. Okay, and I'm going to copy over the regex. So let me get that real quick. So this is a short form that works very well. It's very solid for valid email regex. And again, I'll have this in the notes, but you can also Google and look it up. All right. So now we're going to validate. We're saying this is a valid email regex. So now we're going to have to validate using this regex, right? So how do we do that? We do that over here. It's uniqueness, and then format, colon, with valid email regex. Okay? And that should work. Now again, I encourage you to look this up. If you want to check out regex valid formats and how to build regex, I would encourage you to Google it. It is beyond the scope of this course, so we're just going to use this and stay with it for now. All right. And that should work. Let's try our test again. Perfect, it's passing. All right, great. So one last thing is, in our database, I want to save all the email addresses as downcase at the database level, okay? And how you do that is before saving any email address. So when a user signs up, or when we assign an email address from the console, before saving that to database, we want Rails to change all of those email addresses to downcase. Okay, so how do we do that? We do that by using a before save callback. Okay, callbacks are something I'd encourage you to look up. So Google Rails callbacks and you'll get a whole bunch of methods, and it lists it in terms of hierarchy and how they're executed. So what we're going to use is a before save callback. Okay, so before underscore save, and then we're going to take the email and we're going to basically do email the downcase. Okay, this is equivalent of writing self.email equals self.email.downcase. But in Rails, you don't have to provide the self for the second argument. It automatically assumes it, okay? But you have to provide it for the first one. So we're going to do this before save callback before saving all email addresses. So every time a chef object is created in memory and then it's saved to database, before it saves it, it's going to change the email to downcase. Okay, so that should not do anything to our tests. Our test suite should still be passing. Great, perfect. So we've made a lot of progress with the test suite and our model validations. So we're going to leave it there for now, and in the next section we'll build the one-to-many association between chefs and recipes. So we'll see you there.